Hi, it's Mark Bernard here, and I'm your instructor on this course. I'm going to be talking about the fundamentals of cybersecurity. And kick things off, the first module is going to be about cybersecurity defined. The goals for this module are to explain the fundamentals of cybersecurity so that you have a good grasp of that, as well as being able to explain how the relevance of cybersecurity, why is cybersecurity so important for businesses, government today, and individuals. The objectives are as follows. We will learn the fundamentals of cybersecurity by reviewing and correlating between the Internet's growth, the migration of criminal activities, and the types of crimes that are happening. So you'll get to see sort of the risks as they evolve, and the impact that they're having on industry and government and society in general. We'll also talk about how to learn what the relevance is of cybersecurity by studying common threats, vulnerabilities, and exposures to commercial enterprise, government, and citizens. Introduction. Let's start with the definition, okay? The definition is, for cybersecurity, is the protection of information in all formats during the transmission and processing over a publicly accessible network, such as the Internet. So what that means is that in the past, and we're going to go over this a little bit in the next couple slides, when electronic computers first came out, they were isolated. They were protected by physical security. There was no external network access. And then they kind of evolved and they became connected to each other's offices and manufacturing facilities. And then they evolved a little bit more when the Internet started up around 1990. Business leaders saw a lot of cost savings and operational cost control by using the Internet and leveraging it as a backbone. But unfortunately, there was a lot of exposure as well, and we're going to talk about that. The first years were 1937 to 1953. This is when the electronic computer was created and just before leased lines started up. Head offices and manufacturing facilities had this beautiful red circle around them where it shows that they're protected by physical security. Physical security has always been kind of a predominant thing in property management, but certainly in the cybersecurity world, as we become more connected, you're going to see that physical security is not a big factor anymore. And of course, in the early days of 1937 to 1953, there was no such thing as consumer contact, not direct contact through things like social media. There was no way to reach your customer directly without writing a letter to them and sending it to them and see if they would respond back. So certainly that part has gotten a lot stronger in the last few years. From 1969 to 1989, leased lines took off. These were kind of expensive, but again, only the richest companies could have these computers anyway. So purchasing a leased line for $2,000 a month and connecting it to the facilities or the businesses or the regulators that you needed to have connected to was feasible. And it was sort of the early stages of a VPN, if you like. It wasn't encrypted or anything, but it was a direct line, and nobody else had access to it. So it was just used by that one company. Again, physical security played a predominant role with the head offices, their manufacturing facilities, distribution, and retail locations. Physical security ruled because the only way that you could get access to the data was through a lease line, and a lease line was basically a direct line between you and another business with no middle opportunity for public accessibility to that line. And again, consumers were not directly contacted up to this point. Things changed, though, in the dawn of the Internet. 1989 and forward, the Internet service providers provided this beautiful backbone which created the publicly accessible network by all businesses. Instead of businesses connecting directly to their manufacturing facilities or distribution or retail or consumers, they connected through the backbone and used the Internet to access. Now, in the early days, actually up to just recently, a lot of these lines weren't encrypted. So it was possible to intercept data, as well as the last 30 to 50 years of software development and hardware development were not secure development. A lot of devices and applications were created with built-in vulnerabilities, unfortunately, and they were easily exploited, and they are today. You read about all the breaches that happen, and certainly about the ransomware attacks, and this tells us how vulnerable we really are. There's a lot of work to be done to fix this problem. From 2019 onward, we have all of the internet service provider providing the backbone. We have all the businesses providing connections through the backbone to their manufacturing, distribution, retail, and consumers. Consumers are now accessible through the internet. They can be accessible anywhere. Now, what's adding to the threats and the risk and exposure of this access is something called the Internet of Things. And the Internet of Things is supposed to achieve, to reach a number of 500 billion devices are going to be connected sometime between now and 2030. And what these devices do is they provide access to the internet, obviously, so that they can be used, but also they can pass data through, so to the businesses that are working for you, such as the banks and the manufacturers and the retail facilities. They get some of that data from these Internet of Things. The Internet of Things collects a lot of data. Consumers are not aware of how much data is being collected about them and how it's being shared. And but the Internet of Things opens up a whole new line of exposure as well too, because I mentioned to you before how software and how hardware had been developed with a lot of built-in vulnerabilities because there was no secure coding or development or testing. There was no OWASP project to identify what are the threats when you're exposed to a public network and you have a website, for instance. So a lot of these devices are very weak when it comes to security, and the data that's being collected about you as you walk around every day with these devices, as you use them in your home or at your business, a lot of that data can be easily mined from the good and the bad guys. So the Internet of Things creates a whole new dynamic, and certainly clouds the problem, if you pardon the pun, because we know about cloud computing, and that has a lot to do with this as well, but we're not going to talk about that right at the moment. So why is cybersecurity so important to citizens, government, and businesses? Well, it's because of the economic impact. Because when the economics is impacted, that means that businesses suffer. That means that we have job losses, we have increased costs, because the manufacturers and commercial sector are not going to absorb the costs of breaches. They're going to pass that along to the consumer. So it's going to jack up the prices. It's going to create competition issues because obviously some economies are being hit harder, such as the U.S. economy, $108 billion right now, right? The total cost of global impact of cybercrime is estimated at $445 billion. So you can see that the U.S. has 25% of that at least. And then you have other countries that are smaller but still have very healthy gross domestic product, such as Germany and China and Brazil and India and Japan and Russia and the UK and France and India. They're all being hit as well. Everybody's suffering a little bit. So we need to fix this problem, because as those costs increase to cybercrime, the criminals get richer, but unfortunately the businesses take a hit on the operational costs and unplanned expenses, and somehow they have to recover those costs. So again, they're going to pass those along to the products or the consumers. List 7 unique types of cybercrime that can happen. Well, 3 of them are ransomware. Ransomware is a form of blackmail. In the old days, blackmail was about getting the goods on somebody and then threatening to expose them. Today we have ransomware. So ransomware is about encrypting the database of a business so that they cannot reach their customers or cannot provide the services that they provide. Very embarrassing. And some companies actually go out of business because of ransomware attacks. So it's a very serious problem. The police are looking at this closely to try and see how they can help resolve it. Bottom of the line, you need to have good backup so that if you do get hit by a ransomware attack, that you have a way of reloading your data without the keys. and getting back up and running as quickly as possible. And if you're in the cloud, of course, it could be even easier, but you definitely need to have a strategy on how to deal with this type of cybercrime. Identity theft is another issue because in some countries, when a doctor writes orders, for instance, they're already pre-approved with the insurance company. So when they write the order and they issue it, such as for medication or for surgery or something, it's automatically approved. Well, the criminals have learned about this, and they know that if they're in the middle and they have their bank account number on the other end of that order, that when the doctor makes the order, that the money gets sent to them. And of course, using identity theft to identify people who have medical conditions, who need surgery, etc., so forth, makes it easy for them to fake the orders. They can easily use blackmail to compromise a doctor who's already been given approval by a health authority to sign these orders. And that's the way it's been going so far. And it's causing a lot of extra expense. And again, this jacks up the cost of healthcare, makes it unaffordable for most people. Also, there's the personal issue too. This is why it's important to citizens. It's because if someone steals your identity and goes and has surgery, that gets recorded on your medical record. So the next time that you go to see the doctor or go to have surgery, it's going to come up as an issue, right? And also then there's the expense of paying for that as well. So this is a serious problem. Again, there are regulators taking action about this. The HIPAA Act is fining companies who have breaches, giving them big fines to try and get them to behave properly and implement the proper security to avoid identity theft. Hacking and espionage. Now this is another big impact to economies because some countries, rather than go through the research and development phase of developing a new product, is they steal the idea from another business or another company or another country, and then they manufacture the product and replicate it. But without the R&D costs, the R&D costs are huge for most new products, as you know. They're probably 70% of the original cost until it's paid off. So it's huge opportunity. It's an unfair advantage to competitors who might be competing from other countries by stealing ideas from legitimate companies who have gone through the research and development process. So hacking and espionage is a big problem. Espionage is a long list of potential risks to the organizations, to countries, etc., so forth. So that's 3 out of 7. The next 4, phishing. A lot of times people will receive an email that will say, hello, I'm your bank. They'll have replicated all the information because they've done their research. They've stolen your identity. They know who you bank with. And they send you a letter that looks almost perfect. And it says something like, we've encountered a problem with your account. We need you to provide your password and user email. And, innocent people do that, not realizing that they're passing it to the criminals. Any information that you put into a phishing email, even acknowledging that you received the phishing email by opening it, is a tip-off to the criminals that they have a potential lead to steal money from your account. Computer viruses and destruction of property. So computer viruses are generally created to destroy systems and software. These might be executed by someone who's trying to make a name for themselves, perhaps. They might be used as some sort of a tactic and some kind of a strategy to direct attention away from your security operations while they go in to attack another part of your organization. There's a number of reasons why computer viruses are problems, and so far the only solution we have is to basically install antivirus protection software and monitor for known viruses and basically stop them before they have any impact on your organization. But we know from our research that antivirus software is only about 60% effective. So there's a whole 40% of types of tactics or attack vectors within most infrastructure systems that it's easy for a very skilled and experienced and well-funded group of hackers to get access to the system and the data. So this is why we require something called a defense in depth, which we're not going to talk about today, but as you can imagine from the description, it's a number of layers that you set up. So as the strategy goes, if you set up enough layers, that the threat, whoever it is that's trying to attack your system, will be discouraged or will be completely stopped and isolated away from your data. And then there's the DDoS attacks. Again, another form of blackmail, right? So you have a competitor, or maybe it's an organization who provides services, such as a bank, and you throw a bunch of data. Some of the DDoS attacks now are in the trillions of bits per second. They're massive. They can do a lot of damage too, by the way, because if you have a switch or a firewall or a router that's not designed to handle the DDoS attack, it can easily be overwhelmed and burn out. And that can either shut down your network or can open it up completely. So it depends on how you've designed the security architecture around your network. DDoS attacks happen. Usually a letter follows and says, if you want us to stop, send us X number of Bitcoins, because Bitcoins are the currency that can't be traced that a lot of hackers are using these days. Botnets and theft of property. Well, how this works is that your computer systems, your infrastructure are all provided, whether you're in government or whether you're in the commercial sector or whether you're an individual. They're funded by you or by the government or by the commercial business to provide the services that they're designated to provide. And if you have somebody who's infected your computer with a botnet tool so that they can do a remote command and control of your system and use it to process information, they can take away the resources that are needed, that have been allocated to provide your services. So this can be a problem. My top 8 cybersecurity threats, and I'm going to tell you why. I go through the process of evaluating these threats, and here's some of the information that I use to do that process with. The top 8 are government, spy organizations, organized crime, competitors, contractors, terrorists, malicious actors, third parties, employees. These are all types of people who are... Okay, what the fuck? Now, I go through a detailed process on how to evaluate threats and vulnerabilities, and then I rank them within a 100% scale. And you can see the scale at the top. So we have blue, orange, red, yellow, and green. And each of these are divided up into percentages of risks that are calculated based on the threat, the exposure to the business, the vulnerability, and any implemented controls. And then I calculate that risk. In this case, this is a subset of that calculation. So these are the threats, and the threats get evaluated by looking at their skills, their opportunities, and their impact on the asset.